Well, we welcome you back to another edition of our Instant Preview and Reaction Series, segment number 27. We are joined alongside lead writer for the Bills Wire, part of USA Today, SMG Group, Brad Gelber. Brad, good to see you, sir. It's been about, I think, almost 60 episodes since you've last been on with us. How are things up in Western New York?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's good to see you again. Things are good, obviously. People are excited about football right now. Hockey too, actually. Just a side caveat there with the Sabres playing some better hockey. But yeah, football is obviously bred into the people around here, so it's fun time here on playoff time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt. And yeah, tonight's Ryan Miller night, so that's definitely
Yeah.
definitely some fun stuff playing my Islanders. But hey, listen, take him out. I'm looking for Connor Bedard. But let's keep moving forward with the Buffalo Bills, though. The number 2 seed taking on the 3-seeded Cincinnati Bengals. And obviously, we know all about what happened. Damar Hamlin just a few weeks ago. That was supposed to be out in Paycor Stadium in Cincinnati. And obviously, just about 10 minutes in, that one stopped. But now everything has, the trajectory is going well for Damar. But now this is the first time that these two teams will meet since that time. So, I think the big question here that I'd like to start off with, Brad, is that both teams are seeing each other for the first time since that Monday night. What is the vibe right now around the Bills locker room? Is it any different now that they're playing the Bengals because, of what happened a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's different in the sense that they're playing the team where everything happened. I think
Yeah.
things are just different in general with the team, given everything that happened. I think the fact they've united even more, I guess you could say, just because they're already a really tight unit, and I think you saw that during this whole kind of tragedy as it unfolded. Just the way the team kind of stuck together around something like this. But, the reports have been obviously now that Damar is even visiting the facility while he's not in team meetings. He's actually been coming to the facility on a regular basis at this point, which is pretty miraculous given, where he was a few short weeks ago. So, I think they're at the point now where maybe you could say they're playing for Damar, or they're playing to honor kind of what he went through. And now that he's doing a lot better, I think it's just a huge relief for this team. And I'm sure every team in the NFL at this point, that they can kind of get back to focusing now on football, just because there was so much uncertainty at that point. Would they even finish the season? Would there be playoffs? I mean, it was just, there were so many up in the air scenarios at that point. Obviously, this game didn't get rescheduled, which had mixed reaction, I think, around the league amongst Bills fans, Bengals fans, Chiefs fans, obviously, given the stakes now with the potential AFC Championship game now getting moved to possibly Atlanta if it's Bills Chiefs next week. So there's been a lot of implications for what happened, but I think everyone's just really grateful that, Damar is doing as well as he's doing. And now we can finally see these two teams play, because I know how excited people were for that game when it was, coming up. And now we're going to actually get to see it just this time in Buffalo.
Truly amazing stuff to see, to see the season continue, and now to see these two teams when it matters the most too, especially in the AFC Divisional. Ian Schraier, it's all yours.
Thanks, Joe. And Brad, thank you for taking a few minutes here with us to really recap what occurred last weekend and to preview the upcoming AFC divisional game against the Bengals on Sunday. I guess the first piece I want to get at too is talk about. So let's recap last weekend a little bit first. The game had the largest spread of any of the 6 games on the docket. The Bills were favored by 13.5. The game obviously ended up a lot closer than most people expected, considering Miami was playing with a third-string quarterback in Skylar Thompson. Buffalo jumps out to such a fast start. They're moving the ball so efficiently, especially Josh Allen. Not to the least surprise one of us, gets out to a real fast start. The Dolphins kind of claw their way back into it, and somehow this turns out to be a game for 4 quarters. So I guess aside from the overall result of the game, ultimately the Bills came out on top. But what was really I don't want to say we know what the expectation for the Bills is, so I don't want to sit here right now yet and harp on the good things that they did because we know what they're capable of. But for a game that really wasn't projected to be as close as it was, I guess, what was your most concerning takeaway from last weekend against Miami?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the turnovers are just a huge concern for this team at this point. And I think, it's something you kind of live and die by with Josh Allen a little bit. Obviously, he's cleaned that up over the last couple of years when, he was having his MVP caliber seasons. He's limited those mistakes and really, but anytime you have a Josh Allen type player who makes the plays he makes, you're going to take any of the negatives with the positives. It's just what you have to do with a player that perhaps puts himself in harm's way or is always fighting for the extra yardage. But, he'll be the first to say those interceptions, he had 2 interceptions. He had 3 fumbles in that game. He only lost 1 of them, but that's 5 turnovers right there. That just, you can't win football games that way. So to me, the turnovers were the most concerning part. And then again, obviously, as you already brought up, a rookie 3rd-string quarterback. Again, if you really break down the game, it wasn't Skylar Thompson throwing all over the Bills and their offense, decimating this defense. The Bills defense actually played really well in that game. They only gave up 14 points overall, had some really strong play from some guys you might not be as familiar with if you're, a casual fan or you don't really follow the Bills. Dean Marlowe, for instance, a guy that had been with the Bills for a number of years, left in free agency a couple years ago and played for a couple different teams, was acquired at the trade deadline, was kind of thrust into the starting role there with obviously Micah Hyde, injuring his neck, and he's kind of actually activated, but at this point he's not playing in the playoffs quite yet. Obviously we know about what happened to Damar Hamlin. So Dean Marlowe kind of was slotted into this safety role, had a really big interception at the point of the game when it was 7-0. And the Bills scored on that next drive. So it was 14-0. So the defense played better than maybe you would think just looking at the final score. But those turnovers were just killers for them and it was some freak plays. I mean, if you watch that game, there was some things where you just could not believe they were occurring in the moments they were occurring. So for that to be a consistent thing to happen each game, probably not, but they just have to clean up, I think, what they're doing out there. And then, but yeah, like you said, I think that game was way closer than anyone anticipated. When you see a spread like that, that always makes me nervous. I don't know about when you see that big of a spread. I don't think we ever quite, it never lives up to that hype of a blowout like that. But and Miami and Buffalo know each other. I mean, they're divisional rivals. Miami's played Buffalo tough. They beat them in the regular season this year with Tua playing. So, again, I think the fact they know each other, and Miami's not intimidated by Buffalo. They said so after the game. They said they feel good about this matchup even going forward now. But, the Bills actually limited. They had a lot of trouble with, many teams do, with Jalen Waddle and Hill too, both 2 top speed receivers there. And they struggled versus them in the regular season, and they actually had some yards in that playoff game, but they didn't score. So I think those are some takeaways probably the Bills were happy with, but certainly there was a lot to take away that they need to improve on when they go up against the Cincinnati Bengals.
Brad, that was a perfect segue to my next point, because we always say, even though that the Bills hadn't beaten Miami twice this year, and they always say going into that 3rd game, it's so tough to beat a team 3 times in a year. But even when you have a divisional matchup, and whether it's split or one team sweeps, it's just so difficult to really, at that point in the postseason, playing them for a 3rd time, to hide some of your schemes and try to draw up some more creative plays to really try to change the game plan just enough to throw the opposition off their game. And when you're going up against a team that has, obviously, as you had mentioned, that you can't really kind of snark your nose at having Jalen Waddle and having Tyreek Hill. But what was it in your opinion? Because what we saw from Skylar Thompson wasn't so much that he was, as you said, airing the ball down the field. It was a lot of just kind of short to intermediate throws, still using Jalen Waddle a lot, still trying to use Tyreek Hill in the slot. We saw Mike Szabo catch a touchdown. What was really what youth, besides the turnovers, I guess, on the offensive side of the ball, what in Miami's case do you think that they did so well that really kept Buffalo off their game a little bit?
Yeah, I think they kind of did what Buffalo sometimes does to other teams, and the fact that, Josh Allen takes what the defense gives him. That's kind of where he's gone from being a quarterback that forces a lot of throws, and that's where the turnovers come from. He did that a lot his rookie season, a lot before he kind of took that jump forward. Now we've seen some regression with that this season. It seems he's been forcing the ball a little more again. But when they're on, that offense is on, they're just taking what they're given, and they're using guys like Stephon Diggs. They're using guys in the slot like Isaiah McKenzie or Cole Beasley. That's what Miami did this week. I feel like they just took what Buffalo's defense was giving them. Buffalo was so concerned with the deep ball because they were burned by that in the regular season. I think they limited the deep play, but Miami said, all right, if you're going to take that away from us, we're going to take what we have underneath, especially when you have a rookie quarterback, a third string quarterback that's probably not as accustomed to the full repertoire of the offense as if Tua was in there, or even Teddy Bridgewater for that matter, you have to kind of limit, I think, what you're throwing at him. And they were just able to take advantage. And the Bills struggle, honestly, with some of that intermediary passing game. Tight ends have really sometimes gashed them. So Mike Gesicki catching that one there, it wasn't a total shock. But they have two really, really good linebackers, obviously, in Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano. So there was some surprise, that even Matt Milano on a play, he's just unbelievable. And if you don't know his name, you should know his name. But he had a play there where he missed a tackle that resulted in a bit. And he never misses tackles. I mean, he's the one guy on this defense who's not missed tackles. So I think there was just some uncharacteristic playing. And honestly, when the stakes are that high, you try not to let the moment catch up to you. But I think any team in the playoffs kind of feels that pressure, right? Like as things are going wrong, it's like one thing after another and it's just tumbling away from you. So I think this defense played well, like I said earlier, but I think there was things that they were not expecting, like you mentioned. And certainly, Miami was able to take advantage of that.
Two more questions for you there, Brad. Let's transition to Sunday's 3:00 game now. You spoke a little bit before about the deep ball and Joe Burrow, more than his fair share of options to get the ball around to, specifically T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. These two teams only saw each other for a matter of minutes in Cincinnati a few weeks ago in the wake of, what at the time was so tragic surrounding Damar Hamlin. So going into Sunday's game, I mean, what's going to be the key, as you said, to preventing Joe Burrow from airing out that deep ball and the Bills potentially not coming out with a win at home?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to have to take some of what they did versus Miami and transition that to Cincinnati. Obviously, completely different situations. You're going up against one of the top tier quarterbacks in the league this time. So you can't make the same mistakes you made. And I think it's kind of cliche, but if they put themselves in bad situations on offense, Joe Burrow in this offense is not going to miss the way Miami perhaps did early on in that game. There's not going to be a jump out to a 14, a 17, nothing versus a team like Cincinnati. So they're going to have to play smart right from the get-go. And I think that, maybe someone that doesn't get talked about a lot anymore right now, at least, is Trey White, their starting cornerback, because, he's coming back from an ACL tear the year before. He's really starting to get back into his groove at this point. Like we saw him through the regular season, uncharacteristic sometimes, flat-footed, a little slower than we're used to seeing. But I mean, Trey had a beautiful play if you go back to that game last week versus Miami, where it was literally all ball, like just a ball hawking cornerback play that was like classic Trey White. So I think getting Trey back now to like full steam ahead, I think is huge for the Bills. And then just having guys step up, I think in these moments, whether I mentioned like a guy like Dean Marlowe, Jordan Poyer, who's obviously one of the top safeties in the league and is actually coming up on a contract year here. He's a free agent after this season. So I think taking advantage, we hear a lot about Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, but with Micah not playing, Jordan's just going to have to continue to elevate that secondary there. And then I think getting pressure with four-man, with just their front there. Obviously Von Miller isn't around in the playoffs, unfortunately. He's still active in the locker room and supporting this team, but that's kind of why they brought him in here, right? Was eventually to be that guy in the playoffs, and they don't have him now. So finding ways to get pressure on Joe Burrow without having to bring the house and then expose, the secondary to those wide receivers, I think is going to be crucial for this defense this week.
And Brad, I just love how every response you've had for me has just been kind of a perfect segue into the next question I've had for you. The Bengals are potentially going to be without two starting offensive linemen, specifically left tackle Jonah Williams. So without Von Miller, I mean, where do we see maybe some more pressure up the middle, up the A and B gaps from the linebackers? Where exactly should the pass rush, at least for Buffalo's side, where should we expect to see the pass rush coming from on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it there. I think that's where we'll see some of it. I think too, though, just a guy that he has had a really good season, and maybe again, if I'm speaking to people, it's not to make that it sound like you don't know what you're talking about. But if people don't watch Buffalo, maybe a guy like Ed Oliver is just, he's playing on another level this season, defensive tackle. He's really, I think guys like him, Greg Rousseau, even Boogie Basham, another young defensive end. These guys have really had their game elevated by the presence of Von Miller, even if he's not out there physically right now. And they've just been making, I think sometimes as football fans, we get so excited by, sacks. Like we want to see them get to the quarterback, but just causing a quarterback to rush, to hurry up even. Like they're getting pressures to the quarterback without necessarily getting the sacks. And these guys have been playing so well this season, just in the wake of even before Von Miller got hurt and now that he's hurt. But I think we're going to see some of these young players really step up now in the playoffs because, look, it doesn't get any easier, right? If they do win this game, chances are it's going to be, year 3 of having to play Kansas City, unless, of course, the Jacksonville advances. But if it is Kansas City, as some, many people probably expect to be the case, the road's not going to get any easier. So they're definitely going to have to find a way without Von Miller to dial up those pressures.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brad.
Mike, it's all you.
Yeah, Brad. So just wanted to expand upon that. You guys hit the nail on the head with the defensive end sort of part of it. I have a good friend who's a Bills fan now. Shout him out, Caleb Holfith, who tweeted this out that coming out of last season, probably the 2 main issues for both of these teams was the Bills. You probably needed more pass rush, which is why they added Von Miller. And then for the Bengals, of course, was the offensive line. And now going into this matchup in the playoffs, that's still sort of the key points due to injury. That's probably the key points of emphasis where this matchup is going to be decided. Like we said, Cincinnati without 2 starters. How much pressure, like just expanding upon that, is there on Joe Burrow? Is there that advantage in the secondary with Buffalo compared to when Josh Allen's gonna be on the field in terms of what Burrow's going to be able to do on the scramble and defending the receivers?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think we all know what Josh Allen can do with his legs when he's able to. But that's not to discredit, Joe Burrow's game. They're just different styles of game, really. And it's funny listening to Joe Burrow, I think, talk a little bit about Josh Allen in some of his press conferences, and he's the first one to say he's not Josh Allen, right? He's more of he's a little bit of a throwback of quarterback, maybe compared to what we see nowadays with all these uber athletic guys that can just cause havoc. So I think, though, for Buffalo, like you mentioned, there's some young guys, as I already said. Greg Rousseau is a name that comes to mind. As a defensive end, specifically Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa, some of these young defensive ends that are going to benefit from playing time with Von Miller out. So I think you have to hope, if you're a Bills fan, that a year removed from last year in the playoffs, these guys have continued to grow and mature, and they've learned, like I said, under Von Miller. It's another year in the system with Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott. So I think you just have to hope that they're able to take that next step. Because, like we said, it would be great if Von Miller ran out of the tunnel next week and he was able to play. But I don't think we're going to have any miraculous comebacks at this point. Although I don't count anything out for the Super Bowl after we saw Terrell Owens all those years ago. So I guess you never know what could happen in the Super Bowl. So.
Well, Brad, going to the offensive side of things, we saw, I think, when the Bengals played Baltimore last week, they gave up quite a bit of chunk plays. We saw Tyler Huntley throw some big deep balls. So is that, we know Buffalo's style of play, even though we've seen the turnovers, we know Josh Allen and this offense who loves that big explosive play, whether it's to Stephon Diggs or any of his other receivers. So is there really going to be any sort of change in approach to kind of limit the turnovers, or is it still going to just live and die by those big plays, knowing that it looks like Cincinnati could be vulnerable there?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, actually, if you go back and watch the game from last week, because the Bills were doing so well with the intermediate routes and just feeding their running backs. Like, we don't talk ever in Buffalo about the running backs. We don't talk about Devin Singletary. We don't talk about James Cook. We don't talk about these guys who both have had really nice complementary seasons for the Bills. And I think it's actually made their offense much more diverse, and it's allowed them to capitalize. And then also the tight ends with Dawson Knox, a guy like that. So there's some other areas where the Bills can certainly capitalize on offense. Now we know Josh Allen, we know he likes to take the deep shot, but he really hasn't done that this season that much. Like there's been to the point where I think fans have been like, give us the deep ball. Like we want the deep ball. And, if they're winning though, and they're scoring points, it really doesn't matter. But last week, it seemed like they got away from what was working so well. And all of a sudden, Josh Allen seemed to tap into this, like, I have to throw the ball deep. And there was a couple plays where they should have made the play. There was a big drop. Khalil Shakir, rookie wide receiver, had a big drop. He ended up having a big catch later in the game, but had a big drop that should have been a long catch. Obviously, there was a throw to Stephon Diggs later in the game that was just out of bounds. It seemed like there was quite a few catches last week that were either drops or just barely out of bounds. So we could be talking completely differently if some of those had gone their way. But it seemed like instead of forcing it, the Bills should have stuck with the run game. And it seems like sometimes they get impatient, or Josh Allen gets impatient and gets away from that. So, I think based on some of the success you mentioned that Baltimore saw last week, that we'll certainly see Josh Allen attack if he feels it's there. But I would think there's going to be stress from Sean McDermott and Ken Dorsey that, look, Josh, we don't need the deep ball. Like, you don't need to force things at this point. And he knows the weapons he has. I mean, you mentioned Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis is like Mr. Playoffs. He always comes alive in the playoffs. We saw him last week have a big game. Cole Beasley, all of a sudden, a guy that, people are probably very familiar with, was recently just signed before the playoffs to the Bills practice squad. And last week he was elevated to the active roster. So he had a touchdown and kind of saw him getting back to what he does in the slot for the Bills. It looks like Isaiah McKenzie is going to be healthy and play this week. So they're definitely having some of their complement of weapons back. And I think maybe Josh will be able to trust a little bit more in not having to force the deep ball all the time.
You brought up a perfect point, actually, and you actually took one of my questions away. That's perfectly fine, because the next thing I was going to bring up here, Brad, was about Khalil Shakir. And I remember there were a couple of big plays that he had and a big drop, obviously. And, what has it been since he is a rookie and he's taken the spot, you'd figure, also with Isaiah McKenzie, who missed last week's game? You were saying he's probably going to come back now. Where does Shakir fit in now with McKenzie most likely coming back?
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do, because I feel like Khalil Shakir is such a big part of the Bills' future.
Yep.
I think he's had some really nice opportunities nice times in the games when he has had opportunity this season. Sean McDermott was asked a lot about him last week, and he just had nothing but good things to say. And I think it shows as a rookie when you have a drop in a crucial moment like that, not only for him to go back later on and make such a big catch, but for Josh Allen to trust him to go back to him later in a game like that. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what they do with all these receivers also, because as I mentioned, they actually elevated Cole Beasley to the active roster. So he wasn't just a practice squad call-up. He was actually elevated because he had to be at that point. So they do have a lot of different options at this point, and I think it's going to come down to probably what's the best matchup versus the Cincinnati defense. But yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just going to be interesting, because I think sometimes I read actually a tweet from Chris Sims, who was criticizing the Bills wide receivers, saying basically that compared to the other offenses in the playoffs, Josh Allen does not have an elite group of receivers. He has one of the lower tier group of receivers. And Bills fans say that very personally. We're not pleased with that. But he said outside of Stephon Diggs, obviously. But and I don't disagree with him in the sense that the Bills do have maybe some lesser known players, but there's a lot of talent there. And as given a guy, like I said, Gabe Davis, Dawson Knox, some of these guys who are still up and coming players. So I think that Josh Allen feels pretty good about the weapons he has there.
Good Lord.
Pretty good too. Yeah.
Yeah. Good Lord. I mean, when you list Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, you could even put Shakir into it. Now you got Cole Beasley. I think that's 5, if I'm not mistaken. Sure, we know the names, but maybe the average Joe doesn't, or the average fan doesn't know. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there's not. Come on, that is brutal.
And not to mention the week before, John Brown, who played for the Bills for quite a few years, who's also come back. Him and Cole Beasley had a big touchdown catch in that game versus the Patriots the week before. So quite a few options out there for
you. See? Yeah. So then, you know what? Then that's 6. Yeah. 6. There we go. You're trying to figure that out. Yeah. 6. There we go. So on Sunday, you look at the weather too. It's going to be fairly warm for Buffalo, standards, obviously. 35 degrees, cloudy with some afternoon snow showers. And obviously the good thing is that for Cincinnati, well, obviously Buffalo knows all about it. They could play in, 10 feet of snow. But, Cincinnati, they're accustomed to the to the cold weather and everything along those lines. But I guess my question is there any potential advantage or disadvantage due to the fact that there might be a little little Buffalo wind or lake effect wind, if you will, with Cincinnati coming in? What do you see in that regard?
Yeah, you mean I always find it interesting when people bring up the weather, especially in Buffalo, because it's not like if you live in Buffalo, you have some like superhero ability to like battle cold and wind any better than anyone else, especially given that most of these guys that play for the Bills are from the South or the West Coast. Like, it's not like they were born in Buffalo and have lived here their whole lives. I mean, even Josh Allen, who's, a Wyoming guy in college and loves the snow, apparently is from California. So it's not like it's like these guys aren't born in these conditions. But yeah, I think honestly, maybe the biggest thing is just the wind direction in the stadium. A guy like Tyler Bass will tell you there's games he kicks here all year, and there's games where he struggles with it, and he knows the stadium. I mean, some of his best games have been when the Bills have played in the Dome. I think about the game that got moved during the blizzard, or not the blizzard, the snowstorm earlier in the year, to Detroit, and it was in a Dome, and that was one of his best games of the season. So I think he had that really long kick in that game. So I think as a kicker, you're pretty much, you love the Dome. And even if you play in Buffalo, you don't necessarily want to kick in Buffalo. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those things where the players probably just are more familiar with the stadium given they play here and the wind in that way. But I don't think any sort of like snow or cold is really an advantage because like you said, it's not like Cincinnati's not used to it either. So I just think that by the nature of that, and to your point too, it's a pretty standard day here in Buffalo on Sunday. Nothing crazy like we saw, a few weeks ago. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And my second to last question for you, Brad, obviously, a few weeks ago, or it seems like a few weeks ago, but a couple of months ago, we heard all about Josh Allen's elbow. And, there was a lot of chatter where you're seeing, and I remember Tony Romo brought up a perfect point too, the way his arm movement was, and you would see more of like the side throw kind of now. And now we're seeing it come back to, I guess, his normal throwing motion, if you will. From what you've seen in the last few weeks to, I would say, give or take the last month, is this potentially an injury of the past, or is this something that, they're trying to keep on the down low and, it one wrong move or anything along those lines, it could be back in, I guess in the media, in chatter, if you will.
Yeah, that I think it's always interesting right at the end of the season after locker room clean out when you find out about like 90 injuries that you didn't know about, like a guy's playing with half his finger missing or something. Like these guys somehow make it through the year with all these crazy injuries. But no, I think Josh is getting back to being Josh at this point. I think, going back to what Mike was asking earlier and Ian a little bit, the deep ball, I think, was reflective of that. I think it's showing that he's feeling better. And you're right too. When he first hurt his arm, there was a lot of talk about the angle of the throws because of where he injured his elbow. Like those side throws, some of those throws we've seen Josh Allen make, maybe like the Patrick Mahomes type throws. That's when he would feel it the most. The over the top throws, those ones were less painful to him. So he wasn't necessarily always able to maybe do some of the things we're used to seeing Josh Allen do. So I think now he's getting back to that. And usually during the beginning of the injury, we'd hear like once a week in updates from practice and stuff just about Josh Allen. He would be asked about his elbow and he would always say, it doesn't feel 100%, but I'm playing through it. Like that was always the answer. Like I'm gonna get through it. And now we don't really even hear those questions asked anymore. So it feels like we're all kind of at the point where it seems like he's doing back to kind of Josh Allen stuff. But like I said, we could find out in a few weeks that it's as bad as it ever is and he needs surgery or something. But at this point, I think it's safe to say he looks a lot more like the Josh Allen we're used to seeing.
Unbelievable stuff. Well, my last one for you. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Typical day in Buffalo. Is it a typical W in Buffalo where they advance to Atlanta? Who would ever think that? Or that, that I think that'll come out of my mouth maybe one more time before Sunday forever, unless Atlanta hosts the Super Bowl in years to come. But what's your prediction for this one, because there's a lot of chatter that, Cincinnati is no joke. We know obviously about that, but especially from what we saw, Ian brought it up. There's a lot of, they almost blew it to Miami.
Yep. Yeah. And if you look at like Vegas, if you look at the betting line, like it started with the Bills as the favorite, which I think, the home team usually, if it's close, is going to be the favorite. But I think I mentioned that, and Bills fans were saying to me, like, why is Cincinnati the underdog? And I know even in the media throughout the week, Cincinnati was saying, we certainly don't feel like the underdog. Like we were the ones in the Super Bowl last year. Like, we're the favorites. So if I was a Bills fan, I would be nervous about this game, honestly. Like, I don't feel like this is going to be a cakewalk. I don't think anyone thinks it's going to be, but there's a lot of people in the media picking the Bengals. I think that's the popular choice. And, I'm going to stick with the Bills. I think that they'll find a way to get it done. I think these are the moments where Josh Allen becomes Josh Allen. And I think these are the moments. I said this last week when people were kind of panicking about the Miami game. I said one of the worst qualities of this Bills team, because they have a lot of good qualities, but one of the worst qualities of this team is they play to the level of competition they face. So I think they played a Miami team with a third string quarterback that had injuries of their own, and thought, not that and I don't want to make it seem like I think they overlooked the opponent, because playing for Sean McDermott, he's not going to let you overlook the opponent. I think they just play up to the level of that they're facing. So I think they played a mediocre game because they played a mediocre team. I think when they play a team like Cincinnati, they're going to bring their A game or they're going to get crushed. So I think we're going to see a battle. I think it's going to be similar to last week in terms of a really good football game. But I think I know people, there's a mixed feeling on his home field advantage or a real advantage, but I think in Buffalo it actually is an advantage. So I'm going to think that slight difference this time being in Buffalo, I think the Bills will find a way to come out on top, but I don't think it's going to be a pretty game. And I think they're going to have to, like I said earlier, they're going to have to play smart football in order for that to happen.
Where's our friend Rob DeLuca when we're talking about home field advantage, right, Ian? Oh, that's unbelievable. He'll always tell you if it's not 90-10, or if it's not 90-10, or if it's anything under 90%, it's not a home field advantage. Unbelievable stuff. But ladies and gentlemen, lead writer for the Bills Wire, part of the USA Today SMG Group, Brad Gelber. Brad, thank you so much, and we look forward to having you back on at some point soon.
Yeah, guys, thank you for having me, and hope we get some more good football coming up in the playoffs.
Yeah, there's no doubt. For Ian Schraier, Mike Szabo, Brad Gelber, Joey Jarzynka saying so long. We will see you on our next edition of the Instant Series.